You people don't belong in a neighborhood like this. Patricia Kellerman stands on her manicured lawn, arms crossed, watching a black family unload their SUV across the street. Her voice carries that particular blend of authority and disgust, reserved for moments when she believes she's protecting something precious from contamination. The Memphis sun beats down on Mud Island's exclusive vacation rental district as Dr. Isaiah Washington calmly lifts a suitcase from the trunk. His twin 12-year-old daughters, Maya and Zoe, bounce excitedly toward their temporary home, a beautiful colonial with white columns and a wraparound porch. His wife, Dr. Amelia Washington, shepherds the girls while keeping one eye on the woman glaring from across the street. Isaiah's response is measured, professional. "We're renting this property for the week. Is there something specific you need?" Patricia's jaw tightens. She turns and marches back toward her house, already reaching for her phone. Have you ever been made to feel like you don't belong somewhere you had every right to be? Dr. Isaiah Washington has spent 23 years with the FBI, the last 8 as a senior special agent specializing in civil rights violations. His methodical approach to documentation isn't just professional habit, it's survival instinct honed through decades of navigating systems designed to overlook injustice. When he photographs Patricia Kellerman's initial confrontation, noting the timestamp and her exact words, his family assumes it's simple caution. They don't yet understand they're watching a master investigator at work. His briefcase sits by the front door, sleek black leather containing federal credentials that could end this harassment instantly. But Isaiah has learned that premature revelation often prevents full pattern documentation. He needs to see how far systemic bias will extend when left unchecked. Amelia Washington saves lives as a pediatric surgeon at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. She's accustomed to high-pressure situations and split-second decisions, but watching their neighbors' hostile surveillance feels different from medical emergencies. This threat is personal, targeting her children's right to exist peacefully in shared spaces. Her surgical precision translates into sharp observation skills. She notices Patricia's behavioral patterns before Isaiah mentions them. "She's documenting us too," Amelia tells her husband after their second day. "Taking photos, writing notes. What do you think she's planning?" Isaiah's response carries undertones his family doesn't catch yet. "People like Patricia usually escalate predictably. We'll be ready." Maya and Zoe Washington are 12-year-old twins who've inherited their parents' intelligence and resilience. Maya gravitates towards social justice, already questioning why some adults seem automatically angry at their presence. Zoe prefers technology, instinctively reaching for her phone when situations feel unsafe. Both girls understand more about bias than children should need to, but their parents have prepared them for moments like these. "Remember what we practiced," Isaiah tells them during their first morning. "Stay calm, hands visible, document everything. Truth protects us when we handle it properly." Patricia Kellerman, 52, has served as HOA president for 6 years and works as a real estate agent specializing in exclusive properties. She views herself as a neighborhood guardian, protecting property values and community standards. Her definition of standards, however, consistently correlates with skin color and economic assumptions about who belongs in expensive areas. Her real estate license gives her access to property databases, which she uses to research the Washington family's rental legitimacy. The Mud Island vacation rental sits in Memphis's most exclusive district where million-dollar homes overlook the Mississippi River. The Washingtons chose this location for its proximity to Graceland and Beale Street, planning a week of family bonding away from their demanding careers. The house itself sends a message Patricia can't accept. Successful black families exist and can afford luxury experiences without explanation or permission. Day 1 unfolds with careful observation on both sides. Isaiah notices Patricia's frequent appearances at her front window, her pointed conversations with passing neighbors, and her habit of photographing their comings and goings. He documents each interaction with the thoroughness that's made him successful in civil rights enforcement, though he doesn't reveal this expertise to his family yet. His documentation includes precise timestamps, weather conditions, witness positions, and Patricia's exact words and gestures. Patricia's reconnaissance intensifies by day 2. She researches property records, searching for ammunition. The rental agreement lists a corporate entity rather than individual names, feeding her suspicions about legitimacy. She calls 3 neighbors, sharing concerns about those people and their suspicious behavior of unpacking vacation luggage, playing music during daylight hours, and having the audacity to use their rental property as intended. "I just think we need to be careful," Patricia tells neighbor Margaret Phillips. "You never know what kind of people rent these places short-term. Could be drug dealers, gang members, anything." Margaret's response is non-committal, but Patricia interprets silence as agreement. Isaiah's phone buzzes frequently with work calls. When discussing that Nashville case, he steps inside for privacy, his tone shifting to crisp federal authority. "The pattern evidence is solid. We'll need depositions from all witnesses by Friday. Civil rights violations systematically require comprehensive documentation." Patricia watches these private conversations from her window, noting his serious demeanor and wondering what kind of business he conducts. Her assumptions lean toward illegal activity rather than federal law enforcement. She begins crafting narratives that will justify her eventual escalation to authorities. The foreshadowing builds through small moments. Isaiah's precise note-taking habits, his calm responses to provocation, his strategic decision to let Patricia's behavior escalate while building comprehensive records. He's not just enduring harassment, he's conducting a textbook investigation into systematic bias, allowing the pattern to establish itself fully before intervention. Amelia notices her husband's professional detachment. "You're treating this like a case, aren't you?" Isaiah's smile carries grim satisfaction. "Because it is one. Patricia just doesn't know she's the subject yet." What Patricia mistakes for suspicious behavior is actually professional competence in action. Her target possesses exactly the tools and authority needed to address systematic bias, but revelation must wait for maximum educational impact. How far will her assumptions carry her before reality intervenes? Day 2 brings Patricia's first official complaint. The Washington children's laughter during an afternoon basketball game becomes excessive noise disruption in her formal report to the HOA. She documents the time, 2:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, as if children playing during daylight hours represents criminal activity requiring intervention. "They're being deliberately disruptive," Patricia tells HOA board member David Brooks over the phone. "Bouncing that ball against the garage door, shouting constantly. This is a quiet family neighborhood." David's response puzzles her. "Patricia, it's the middle of the afternoon. Kids are supposed to play." But Patricia's complaint isn't really about noise. It's about presence, about audacity, about black children feeling comfortable enough to play loudly in her exclusive space. She escalates to property management the next morning, demanding immediate action against what she terms unacceptable behavior from temporary residents. The basketball itself becomes a symbol of defiance in Patricia's mind. Every bounce represents disrespect for neighborhood standards she's appointed herself to enforce. She begins timing the children's outdoor activities, creating detailed logs of when Maya and Zoe dare to laugh too loudly or play too enthusiastically in their temporary backyard. Day 3's confrontation happens during the family's return from Graceland. Patricia intercepts them at the mailbox, demanding to see their rental documentation. Isaiah's response demonstrates the professional de-escalation techniques that have kept him alive through 2 decades of federal investigations. "Ma'am, we've already established that we're legitimate renters. Is there something specific we can help you with today?" Patricia's voice rises with each word. "I have every right to verify who's staying in my neighborhood. For all I know, you could be squatters, drug dealers, gang members, anything. These properties are supposed to be for respectable families." The coded language hangs in the air like humidity. Isaiah recognizes the patterns he's documented in dozens of civil rights cases. The assumption that black presence equals criminality, the demand for papers, and proof that white families never face, the barely contained hostility masquerading as neighborhood concern. Zoe instinctively starts recording on her phone, understanding that documentation protects her family when adults behave irrationally. Maya steps closer to her father, recognizing the escalation pattern they've discussed in family safety conversations. Amelia maintains calm but positions herself strategically between Patricia and her children, her surgical training extending to threat assessment. "We're not required to show you private rental agreements," Isaiah explains with infinite patience. "But I'm happy to have you contact the property management company if you have legitimate concerns." This reasonable response infuriates Patricia further. She expected defensiveness, anger, or intimidation, reactions that would justify her suspicions and provide ammunition for future complaints. Isaiah's professional competence doesn't fit her narrative about threatening black families disrupting peaceful white neighborhoods. "Don't get smart with me," Patricia snaps. "I know your type. You think you can just waltz into any neighborhood and do whatever you want." The mask slips completely. Amelia's jaw tightens as she processes the raw bigotry directed at her family. Maya and Zoe exchange glances, their childhood innocence chipped away by adult hatred they've done nothing to deserve. Day 4 brings Patricia's increasingly frantic call to Morrison Property Management, demanding verification of the Washington family's legitimacy. Manager Jennifer Morrison's response adds another layer of documentation to Isaiah's growing case file. "Mrs. Kellerman, I can't discuss specific tenant information with you. The Washington family are excellent renters who've caused no problems whatsoever." "But how do you know they're not subletting illegally? How do you know they're really who they claim to be? What if they're running some kind of operation out of that house?" Jennifer's patience wears thin as Patricia's questions become increasingly paranoid. "Because we run comprehensive background checks, verify employment and income, require security deposits, and maintain regular contact with all our rental properties. Everything about their rental is completely legitimate." Patricia's frustration mounts as each official channel refuses to validate her suspicions. The system isn't supporting her assumptions about dangerous black families infiltrating white neighborhoods. This contradiction between her expectations and reality drives her toward more desperate measures. "Well, something's not right about them," Patricia insists. "Normal families don't act the way they do." "How exactly are they acting, Mrs. Kellerman?" The question forces Patricia to articulate her complaints. Children playing basketball, parents barbecuing dinner, family members going to tourist attractions and returning with shopping bags. The absurdity of criminalizing normal vacation activities becomes apparent even to Patricia, fueling her defensive anger. Day 5 brings the concerned neighbors meeting Patricia, organizes in her living room. She invites 8 households, expecting unified support for her harassment campaign. The reality disappoints her significantly. "I think you're overreacting," neighbor Tom Bradley tells her directly. "They seem like a nice family on vacation. The kids are polite, the parents are quiet, and they keep their rental property cleaner than some permanent residents." Margaret Phillips adds reluctantly, "Patricia, maybe we should just let them enjoy their week and leave them alone. They haven't actually done anything wrong." But Patricia needs validation for her escalating behavior. "You don't understand the property value implications. Once word gets out that just anyone can rent here, our exclusivity is gone forever. These short-term rentals attract the wrong element." The coded language isn't lost on attendees, but most neighbors refuse to engage with Patricia's racial anxieties. Only elderly Howard Brennan offers lukewarm support, more from loneliness and desire for social interaction than actual agreement with her position. "Maybe we should keep an eye on things," Howard suggests weakly. Patricia seizes this minimal validation. "Exactly. We need to document everything in case problems develop." The critical incident unfolds on day 6. The Washington family returns from an afternoon at the National Civil Rights Museum. Educational timing that will prove ironically appropriate for coming events. Two police cruisers wait in their driveway, Officers Thompson and Mitchell responding to Patricia's report of suspicious activity and possible drug-related behavior. Isaiah's federal training activates immediately. He instructs his family with quiet authority, perfected through years of high-stakes situations. Everyone stay calm, hands visible, speak only when spoken to. Let me handle this completely. Officer Thompson approaches with standard professional courtesy, but underlying tension suggests he's already formed opinions based on Patricia's detailed report. We received a call about possible suspicious activity at this address. Can you folks provide some identification and explain what you're doing here? Isaiah's response demonstrates textbook cooperation while subtly establishing his own credibility. Absolutely, officers. We're renting this property for the week. I'll get our documentation and rental agreement. The scene unfolds with choreographed precision Isaiah has witnessed countless times in his civil rights investigations. Patricia watches from her front window, arms crossed, wearing the satisfied expression of someone who believes justice is finally being served. She's called in the system to remove the problem she can't handle directly. Maya whispers to her sister, "Why are we in trouble? We didn't do anything wrong." Zoe already has her phone ready, understanding instinctively that documentation will be crucial for whatever comes next. Both girls have inherited their parents' quick thinking under pressure and their father's systematic approach to evidence collection. Officer Mitchell reviews the rental agreement while radioing dispatch for verification of the property's rental status. The process takes 20 minutes of the Washington family standing in their own driveway, being treated as potential criminals while their white neighbor observes approvingly from her strategic position. "Everything checks out," Thompson finally announces. "Sorry for the inconvenience, folks. Just following up on a neighbor complaint." But Patricia isn't finished. She approaches the officers directly, inserting herself into the conversation with increasing desperation as her expected outcome fails to materialize. "Did you check whether they're really who they claim to be? Did you run background checks? What if they're using fake identification? What if this is some kind of front operation?" Isaiah mentions casually that he works with law enforcement, but the officers dismiss this information as irrelevant to their immediate concerns. They don't investigate further, missing the significance of what Isaiah isn't quite ready to reveal. "Ma'am, we verified their rental agreement and identification," Mitchell tells Patricia with growing firmness. "These folks have every right to be here." Patricia's confidence cracks as the officers prepare to leave without arresting anyone. This outcome doesn't match her expectations about police support for her concerns about black families in white spaces. Isaiah's documentation of the entire incident is thorough and professional, including badge numbers, exact times, verbatim statements from all parties, photographs of Patricia's involvement in the police response, and detailed notes about the officers' procedures and attitudes. He's building a comprehensive case file about systematic harassment, though neither Patricia nor the responding officers understand the full implications yet. As the police cars pull away, Patricia retreats to her house, already planning her next escalation. The system hasn't supported her assumptions, but she interprets this as system failure rather than evidence that her assumptions are fundamentally wrong. How far will she escalate before discovering her target's true authority? Officers Thompson and Mitchell filed their standard incident report that evening, listing the call as resolved peacefully, no violation found. The paperwork becomes part of Isaiah's growing documentation, though the officers don't realize they're creating evidence for a future federal civil rights investigation. Patricia escalates immediately to the rental company's corporate headquarters, bypassing local management entirely. Her complaint to Regional Director Michael Stevens paints the Washington family as dangerous elements threatening neighborhood stability. "These people are clearly running some kind of operation," Patricia insists during her phone call. "Normal families don't have constant visitors, don't take mysterious phone calls, and don't behave so secretly." Stevens reviews the Washington family's rental history. Perfect payment record, no previous complaints, excellent references. Mrs. Kellerman, we have no basis for any action against these tenants. They've been model renters. You're not listening. This is about criminal activity, drug dealing, and possible gang connections. Do you have any evidence of illegal activity? The question forces Patricia to confront her weakness. Her evidence consists of children playing basketball, parents cooking dinner, and family members leaving for tourist attractions. Day 7 brings Patricia's escalation to city code enforcement, claiming occupancy violations and possible commercial activity. Inspector Carlos Rodriguez arrives expecting overcrowding or business operations. Instead, he discovers the Washington family enjoying breakfast. 4 people in a house designed for 8 guests, no violations anywhere. Rodriguez's report adds documentation. No violations found. Property occupied by a family unit well within permitted limits. The complainant appears to have inaccurate information. Patricia's social media campaign intensifies. Her posts in the neighborhood Facebook group grow increasingly desperate as official channels refuse to validate her concerns. Day 4 of suspicious activity, she writes. Multiple vehicles coming and going, secretive phone conversations, children left unsupervised while parents conduct unknown business. Neighbor Tom Bradley responds, Patricia, I've seen a family going to tourist attractions and playing in their yard. What exactly concerns you? Patricia's paranoia deepens. Drug dealers look like normal families these days. They're trained to blend in. Officers Thompson and Mitchell grow irritated with repeat calls. Their radio conversations reflect mounting frustration with frivolous complaints. That address again, Thompson mutters when dispatch sends them to investigate Patricia's Thursday report of loud music and possible drug transaction. They arrive to find the Washington family loading beach chairs for Mud Island River Park. No music, no drugs, no violations. The drug transaction was Isaiah handing his daughter $20 for the concession stand. Mitchell's patience cracks. Ma'am, this is the 4th call we've answered about this family. They're clearly legitimate renters on vacation. We need you to stop calling unless there's an actual emergency. It's your job to investigate suspicious activity. What you're seeing is a family on vacation, Thompson states firmly. If you continue making false reports, we'll have to consider harassment charges. The threat should deter Patricia, but her obsession has moved beyond rational calculation. Isaiah's strategic approach becomes clearer to his family. Amelia watches her husband's methodical evidence collection, photographs, audio recordings, detailed timelines, copies of official reports. You're building a case, she observes. I'm documenting a pattern, Isaiah corrects. Patricia's behavior represents systematic harassment based on racial bias. Until she fully reveals the extent of her actions, intervention would be premature. Maya asks during dinner, why don't you just tell them you're FBI? Isaiah's explanation carries professional weight. If I reveal my authority too early, Patricia modifies her behavior and the pattern remains incomplete. Full documentation protects other families who might face similar harassment. Detective Maria Santos reviews multiple reports filed about the Washington family, noting complete absence of evidence supporting criminal activity. The pattern suggests harassment rather than legitimate law enforcement concerns. Mrs. Kellerman, I've reviewed all the reports. Officers have responded multiple times and found no violations, no evidence of criminal activity, and no basis for further investigation. Patricia's disconnection from reality shows, of course they didn't find anything obvious. These people are professionals. They know how to hide their activities. Santos recognizes racially motivated harassment disguised as law enforcement cooperation. Her recommendation triggers the first official review of Patricia's complaint pattern. Isaiah's phone calls become more frequent, adding fuel to Patricia's theories. What she doesn't realize is that these calls relate to his federal caseload, ongoing civil rights investigations requiring his attention even during vacation. Friday morning brings Patricia's most desperate escalation. Her call to the FBI's Memphis field office claims possible terrorist activity, citing secretive phone calls in unknown codes and surveillance of neighborhood infrastructure. Special Agent Jennifer Chang takes the report professionally while internally recognizing the absurdity. The described terrorist activity consists of a family photographing their vacation rental and speaking privately on personal calls. Patricia's confidence returns as she reaches what she believes is appropriate authority. Federal agents will surely recognize the threat she's been documenting. What Patricia doesn't realize is that her harassment campaign is being investigated by exactly the person equipped to ensure accountability. How much longer can Isaiah maintain his cover before Patricia's escalation forces his hand? Day 7 arrives with Patricia's confidence at its peak. Her call to the FBI field office has convinced her that federal intervention is imminent. She positions herself at her front window, waiting for the cavalry to arrive and validate every suspicion she's harbored about the dangerous black family corrupting her pristine neighborhood. Instead, she watches the Washington family load their car for another tourist excursion, their children laughing as they argue over who gets to choose the radio station. The normalcy of the scene should give Patricia pause, but her investment in her narrative has moved beyond rational observation. At 2:47 p.m., Patricia makes the call that will shatter her worldview completely. Memphis Police, I need multiple units at 847 Riverside Drive immediately. I have definitive proof of drug activity. I just witnessed a clear drug transaction in broad daylight. What Patricia actually witnessed was Isaiah handing Amelia his wallet so she could pay for parking at the Civil Rights Museum. But in Patricia's mind, every interaction between the Washington family members has become evidence of criminal conspiracy. Dispatcher Sarah Brooks' voice carries barely concealed frustration. Ma'am, this is the 6th call we've received about this address this week. Are you certain you're witnessing actual criminal activity? I know a drug deal when I see one, Patricia insists. Money changed hands. They looked around nervously, and now they're leaving quickly to avoid detection. 3 patrol units respond, including Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, who's heard enough about this address to review the case file personally. Officers Thompson and Mitchell arrive first, their body language broadcasting their irritation with another frivolous Patricia Kellerman complaint. The Washington family returns from their museum visit to find patrol cars blocking their driveway once again. But this time, Isaiah recognizes that the escalation has reached the point where intervention is necessary. Patricia's calls to federal authorities have crossed lines that require immediate response. Isaiah instructs his family with calm authority. Everyone stay in the car until I handle this. Zoe, keep recording. Maya, document everything you observe. He approaches Sergeant Rodriguez with the measured confidence that comes from 23 years of federal law enforcement experience. Sergeant, I need to speak with you privately for a moment. Rodriguez notes something different in Isaiah's demeanor, an authority that wasn't apparent during previous interactions. Sure, step over here. Patricia watches this exchange from her strategic position, certain that Isaiah is about to be arrested for whatever crimes she's convinced herself he's committed. Her vindication is finally arriving. Isaiah reaches into his jacket pocket and produces his federal credentials. Special Agent Isaiah Washington, FBI Civil Rights Division. I need to discuss the harassment pattern that's been developing at this address. The words hit Rodriguez like cold water. His entire posture changes as he processes the implications. The suspicious family Patricia has been targeting for a week includes a senior federal agent specializing in exactly the type of violations she's been committing. Agent Washington, I had no idea you were... Rodriguez's voice trails off as he realizes the magnitude of the situation. Isaiah's response carries the quiet authority of someone accustomed to commanding respect in federal courtrooms. I've been documenting systematic harassment based on racial bias. The complainant has filed multiple false reports, engaged in surveillance, and attempted to use law enforcement as a weapon against my family. Rodriguez glances toward Patricia, who's approaching with confident steps, expecting to witness Isaiah's arrest. Instead, She sees the sergeant speaking respectfully to the man she's spent a week trying to destroy. "Mrs. Kellerman," Rodriguez calls out, his voice now carrying official weight. "I need you to stop right there." Patricia's confusion is evident. "Why aren't you arresting him? I gave you all the evidence you need." "Ma'am, you've been harassing a federal agent and his family." The words don't immediately register. Patricia's brain struggles to process information that contradicts everything she's believed about the Washington family. "That's impossible," she says slowly. "He's not... They can't be. You're making a mistake." Isaiah presents his shield and credentials to Patricia directly, watching her face as reality crashes into her carefully constructed narrative. The FBI badge glints in the afternoon sunlight, its authority undeniable. "Special Agent Washington, Civil Rights Division," Isaiah says quietly. "I specialize in investigating systematic harassment and bias-motivated misconduct." Patricia's legs nearly buckle as the full implications hit her. Every call she's made, every false report she's filed, every moment of harassment she's directed at Isaiah's family has been documented by exactly the person equipped to ensure federal prosecution for civil rights violations. The children watch from the car as their father's secret identity is revealed. Maya whispers to Zoe, "Now I understand why Dad was so patient." Zoe responds with 12-year-old wisdom. He was letting her dig her own grave. Sergeant Rodriguez requests immediate backup and calls for Lieutenant Sarah Barnes to respond to the scene. The situation has escalated from neighborhood dispute to potential federal civil rights case, requiring supervisory oversight and careful documentation. Patricia's attempts to salvage her position become increasingly desperate. "How was I supposed to know? You should have identified yourself immediately." Isaiah's response demonstrates the professional restraint that's made him effective in federal civil rights enforcement. Federal agents aren't required to announce their identity to neighbors, but citizens are required to respect other citizens' rights regardless of profession. The power dynamic has shifted completely. Patricia, who spent a week wielding perceived authority against a black family, now faces the reality that her target possesses actual federal authority to address systematic bias. Officers Thompson and Mitchell stand awkwardly, realizing they've been unwitting participants in harassment directed at a senior federal agent. Their dismissive attitude toward Isaiah's earlier mention of law enforcement work now seems professionally embarrassing. Amelia and the children exit the car as the situation stabilizes. For the first time in a week, they can move freely in their temporary neighborhood without feeling like suspects in their own vacation. Patricia retreats toward her house, her confident surveillance position transformed into a strategic liability. Every window she used to spy on the Washington family now feels like evidence of her obsessive harassment pattern. The neighborhood dynamics shift instantly as other residents witness the revelation. Tom Bradley emerges from his house, his expression mixing relief with embarrassment about Patricia's behavior. Margaret Phillips watches from her porch, finally understanding why the Washington family seemed so unusually calm under pressure. Isaiah's federal identity explains everything that Patricia misinterpreted. His methodical documentation habits, his professional phone calls, his strategic patience under provocation, and his family's practiced composure during police encounters. The investigation Patricia demanded is about to begin, but she's become the subject rather than the complainant. How will the system respond when harassment targets a federal agent specializing in civil rights enforcement? Lieutenant Sarah Barnes arrives within 15 minutes, her patrol supervisor experience immediately recognizing the gravity of the situation. A senior FBI agent specializing in civil rights violations has been systematically harassed by a community member who weaponized local police responses against his family. This isn't just a neighborhood dispute. It's a potential federal case with serious implications for the entire department's reputation and procedures. Barnes requests a private conference with Isaiah, establishing the professional respect his federal authority commands. "Agent Washington, I need to understand the full scope of what's happened here so we can respond appropriately and ensure this situation is handled with the seriousness it deserves." Isaiah presents his documentation with the thoroughness that's made him successful in federal civil rights enforcement across multiple jurisdictions. His evidence file includes time-stamped photographs of each interaction, audio recordings of Patricia's statements, copies of all police reports filed about his family, screenshots of her social media posts, detailed notes about every escalation in her harassment pattern, and comprehensive analysis of the systematic nature of her campaign. Mrs. Kellerman has filed 6 false police reports in 5 days, Isaiah explains methodically, his presentation resembling courtroom testimony. She's engaged in systematic surveillance, attempted to use law enforcement as a weapon against my family, escalated to federal authorities with fabricated terrorism allegations, and demonstrated a clear pattern of racially motivated harassment designed to drive us from this neighborhood. Barnes reviews the evidence with growing concern and professional embarrassment. Each police response represents departmental resources wasted on harassment disguised as legitimate complaints. More seriously, the pattern suggests her officers inadvertently participated in civil rights violations against a federal agent and his family, creating potential liability for the entire department. Agent Washington, I need to know directly. Do you intend to file federal charges against Mrs. Kellerman or pursue civil rights violations against our department? Isaiah's response reflects his professional commitment to education over punishment when meaningful change remains possible. That depends entirely on how seriously the system takes accountability and implements reforms. This isn't about personal vindication. It's about preventing other families from experiencing similar harassment when they lack federal protection. The investigation unfolds rapidly once official machinery engages with appropriate urgency. Internal Affairs. Captain Monica Torres arrives to begin formal documentation of the incident, bringing 2 investigators and comprehensive recording equipment. Her preliminary review reveals troubling patterns in how Patricia's complaints were handled throughout the week by multiple officers and supervisors. The officers responding never questioned the validity of repeat calls from the same complainant about the same address, Torres notes during her detailed review of dispatch records. Standard procedure requires assessment of complainant credibility when patterns suggest harassment rather than legitimate law enforcement concerns. But this protocol was completely ignored. Torres identifies systematic failures in departmental response. No supervisor review of repeat calls. No assessment of complainant motivations, no recognition of harassment patterns, and no protection for citizens being systematically targeted through abuse of police resources. Body camera footage from each police response provides objective documentation of the encounters, creating an undeniable record of escalating harassment. The recordings reveal Patricia's increasing aggression, her insertion of herself into police interactions beyond any legitimate authority, and her increasingly paranoid allegations about the Washington family's completely normal vacation activities. Officer Thompson's footage from Tuesday shows Patricia demanding with entitled authority, "Why aren't you searching their car thoroughly? What if they have drugs or weapons hidden somewhere? Normal families don't act this secretive about their business." Officer Mitchell's Wednesday recording captures her persistent and increasingly frantic insistence. You need to run comprehensive background checks on all of them immediately. I don't care if their rental paperwork looks legitimate, documents can be forged easily, and these people are clearly hiding something. Thursday's footage documents Patricia's most aggressive intervention, where she attempted to direct police procedures with the confidence of someone certain about her authority. You should be getting a warrant to search that house for evidence. Normal families don't take that many private phone calls or have people coming and going constantly. This is obviously some kind of criminal operation. Friday's recording shows Patricia's complete loss of rational perspective. I'm telling you, they're terrorists or drug dealers or something worse. They're surveilling our neighborhood, taking pictures of houses, planning something terrible. You need to arrest them immediately before something happens. The pattern evidence builds systematically and undeniably. Patricia's behavior escalates from suspicious observation to active interference with police procedures, culminating in false reports that wasted federal resources on fabricated terrorism allegations, specifically designed to trigger maximum law enforcement response and potential violence against the Washington family. Detective Maria Santos joins the investigation team, bringing her specialized experience with bias-motivated incidents and hate crime documentation. Her analysis of Patricia's complaint progression reveals classic harassment escalation patterns typically seen in cases involving racial animus targeting law-abiding citizens exercising their constitutional rights. The complainant's allegations became increasingly severe and desperate as law enforcement repeatedly failed to validate her initial racial suspicions, Santos explains during her briefing to Lieutenant Barnes. When reality consistently contradicted her expectations about dangerous black families, she systematically fabricated more serious accusations to force the outcome she demanded. Santos identifies key indicators of racially motivated harassment that should have triggered immediate intervention. Patricia's assumption of criminality based solely on race, her demands for documentation and searches not required of white families, her escalation when normal procedures didn't support her racial bias, and her deliberate weaponization of law enforcement against citizens peacefully exercising their rights. Meanwhile, Patricia attempts desperate damage control from her house, calling neighbors frantically to explain her side of the story and gather support for her position. Her phone conversations reveal her continued complete disconnect from reality and absolute failure to accept any responsibility for her systematic harassment campaign. "How was I supposed to know he was FBI?" Patricia protests defensively to neighbor Margaret Phillips. "He should have identified himself immediately instead of acting suspicious and secretive about everything. If he'd just told me who he was, none of this would have happened." Margaret's patience finally breaks completely after a week of watching Patricia's obsessive harassment escalate daily. "Patricia, they were a normal family on vacation doing normal vacation things. You were the one acting suspicious, spying on them constantly from your window, calling police because children were playing basketball, making up completely false stories about drug deals when they handed their daughter lunch money." The neighborhood response splits along entirely predictable lines, revealing the community's underlying dynamics around race and accountability. Residents who quietly supported Patricia's harassment campaign suddenly discover urgent business elsewhere and refuse to answer their phones. Those who questioned her behavior feel simultaneously vindicated and deeply embarrassed about their community's complicity in the systematic harassment of an innocent family. Tom Bradley approaches Isaiah directly to offer his personal apology and explanation for his previous silence. "Agent Washington, I should have spoken up much sooner when I saw what Patricia was doing day after day. Her behavior was obviously wrong, and we all knew it but didn't want to get involved or create neighborhood conflict." Isaiah's response demonstrates the professional grace that's sustained him through decades of confronting systematic bias in communities across America. "Mr. Bradley, silence in the face of harassment is understandable when people fear social consequences. What matters now is how the community chooses to respond moving forward and whether meaningful change emerges from this moment." The HOA board convenes an emergency meeting that evening, with all 6 members present for what everyone understands will be a watershed moment for their community organization. Patricia's position as president becomes completely untenable once board members fully understand she's used her official authority to systematically harass a federal agent and his family while claiming to represent their community's values. Property manager David Brooks leads the discussion with grim professionalism, fully understanding the massive legal liability Patricia has created for every homeowner in the association. Patricia's actions have exposed the entire association to potential federal civil rights litigation. Her harassment campaign was conducted while serving as our elected representative, making the HOA potentially liable for her systematic misconduct. Board member Lisa Park voices what everyone is thinking but hasn't wanted to articulate directly in previous discussions. "We need her immediate resignation tonight. This behavior is completely unacceptable regardless of who the targets were. But systematically harassing a federal agent makes our legal exposure exponentially worse." Patricia arrives at the meeting expecting support and community solidarity, finding instead a completely unanimous demand for her immediate resignation and potential legal action. Her protests about being blindsided by Isaiah's federal identity fall on deaf ears as board members recognize the complete irrelevance of his profession to the fundamental wrongness of her racially motivated actions. "You spent an entire week systematically harassing a family because of their race," Board Treasurer Robert Kim states with unusual directness and moral clarity. "Their profession is completely irrelevant to the wrongness of your behavior. You assumed they were criminals based solely on their skin color and then weaponized law enforcement against them." The confrontation Patricia avoided all week finally arrives as community members speak openly about her well-established pattern of harassment, specifically targeting people of color in their neighborhood. Neighbor after neighbor describes incidents they witnessed but didn't report, creating a comprehensive picture of systematic racial bias spanning several years and affecting multiple families. "This isn't the first time Patricia has specifically targeted black families in our neighborhood," reveals Janet Morris, a 10-year resident who's remained strategically silent until this moment. "She's systematically complained about every single black family who's ever rented here, but this time, she went too far and got caught targeting someone with the authority to fight back." The revelation that Patricia's harassment represents a well-established pattern rather than an isolated incident transforms the investigation's scope significantly and dangerously for her. Isaiah's case becomes representative of broader systematic bias affecting multiple families over several years, suggesting potential federal civil rights violations far beyond this single incident. How will systematic change emerge from this moment of individual accountability and community reckoning? The formal consequences begin with swift precision that reflects the seriousness of civil rights violations in federal law enforcement. Officers Thompson and Mitchell receive immediate suspension, pending completion of mandatory bias training and formal reprimands that will remain in their permanent personnel files. Their failure to recognize and interrupt a harassment pattern targeting a federal agent represents a significant professional failure requiring remedial education. Lieutenant Barnes implements immediate policy changes based on Isaiah's recommendations. New dispatch protocols require supervisor review when the same complainant files multiple reports about the same address within a 7-day period. Body camera policy enforcement receives strengthening with mandatory review of all interactions involving repeat complainants to identify potential harassment patterns before they escalate to federal violations. The Community Liaison Program launches within 30 days. Connecting police supervisors with neighborhood representatives to prevent weaponization of law enforcement against law-abiding citizens. Training modules address implicit bias recognition, harassment pattern identification, and protection of citizens' constitutional rights during police encounters. Patricia faces immediate and comprehensive consequences that reflect the severity of systematic civil rights violations. The HOA board votes unanimously for her immediate removal from all positions, effective immediately. Her real estate license undergoes formal review by the state licensing board for potential fair housing violations based on her documented pattern of racial harassment spanning multiple years. The civil rights complaint Isaiah files creates a permanent record accessible to future harassment victims, establishing legal precedent for addressing systematic bias disguised as neighborhood concern. Patricia's name enters federal databases tracking individuals who've engaged in racially motivated harassment, affecting her ability to serve in positions of community authority. Internal Affairs. Captain Torres completes her investigation with recommendations for systematic departmental reform. Her report mandates quarterly training on harassment recognition, establishes protocols for protecting citizens from abuse of police resources, and requires supervisor intervention when complainant credibility becomes questionable through repeated false reports. The resolution extends beyond individual punishment to meaningful community healing. Isaiah's family completes their vacation with newfound neighborhood support that demonstrates how accountability can transform community dynamics. Previously silent neighbors step forward to apologize and extend genuine friendship invitations that transcend racial barriers. Tom Bradley organizes a neighborhood barbecue specifically to welcome the Washington family and demonstrate community rejection of Patricia's harassment campaign. 8 families attend, creating connections that will outlast the vacation rental period. Children who were afraid to interact with Maya and Zoe during Patricia's harassment campaign now play freely together, modeling the integration their parents should have demonstrated from the beginning. Margaret Phillips presents the Washington family with a formal apology letter signed by 12 neighbors, acknowledging their failure to interrupt harassment and committing to active intervention if similar situations arise in the future. The letter represents community accountability and promises of changed behavior rather than empty expressions of regret. The Memphis Police Department uses the incident as a training case study for bias recognition and harassment prevention. Isaiah's documentation becomes educational material, demonstrating how systematic harassment escalates when left unchecked and how proper procedures can protect both citizens and officers from manipulation. Detective Santos presents the case at a regional law enforcement conference, emphasizing how communities of color use police resources as weapons against citizens exercising their rights. Her presentation receives implementation in police academies across Tennessee, expanding the educational impact beyond Memphis. Patricia's quiet departure from the neighborhood occurs within 2 weeks, her moving truck visible to residents who witness the consequences of systematic harassment. Her house goes on the market immediately, listed with a different real estate agency after her previous colleagues distanced themselves from her documented bias violations. Real estate agent Susan Weber publicly commits to fair housing training for all neighborhood agents, ensuring Patricia's violations don't represent broader industry patterns in the community. Her initiative creates accountability mechanisms, preventing future discrimination disguised as property value protection. The Washington children process their experience with remarkable resilience, understanding that their father's patience allowed complete documentation of systematic bias. Maya writes a school essay about civil rights enforcement that wins regional recognition, while Zoe creates a digital presentation about harassment documentation that her teachers share with other students. Isaiah's professional satisfaction balances recognition that meaningful change requires ongoing vigilance. His case file becomes part of federal tracking systems monitoring harassment patterns, contributing to broader civil rights enforcement across multiple jurisdictions. The vacation harassment transforms into educational opportunities, benefiting families who lack federal protection. Amelia's medical colleagues learn about the incident through her presentation at a pediatric conference, raising awareness about how healthcare professionals can recognize and address systematic bias affecting their patients' families. Her advocacy extends their experience beyond personal resolution to professional education. The Neighborhood Association implements new policies requiring cultural competency training for all board members and establishing clear procedures for addressing harassment complaints that protect residents from abuse of organizational authority. Patricia's removal creates space for more inclusive leadership representing diverse community values. 6 months later, the policy changes demonstrate measurable impact on community policing. Harassment complaints decrease significantly as officers receive training recognizing abuse of police resources. Community trust improves as residents understand their rights receive protection through proper procedures rather than individual advocacy. Isaiah's family returns to Memphis for Maya and Zoe's spring break, staying in the same rental property with complete community support. Their return demonstrates that accountability creates lasting change rather than temporary embarrassment for perpetrators of systematic bias. The children play basketball in their driveway without surveillance, their laughter representing victory over attempts to silence their joy through harassment. Neighbors join their games spontaneously, creating the inclusive community Patricia tried to prevent through her systematic exclusion campaign. Federal tracking systems record the incident as a successful intervention, preventing escalation to violence that often results from unchecked harassment campaigns. Isaiah's strategic patience allowed complete pattern documentation while protecting his family through professional knowledge and federal authority that most harassment victims lack. The resolution demonstrates that justice requires both individual accountability and systematic reform to prevent future violations. Patricia's consequences serve as education for potential future perpetrators, while policy changes protect vulnerable community members who lack federal enforcement authority. How will these changes influence the next family who faces systematic harassment? 6 months later, the changes implemented through Isaiah's case demonstrate measurable impact across Memphis law enforcement and beyond. The new dispatch protocols have prevented 12 documented harassment campaigns against families of color, with supervisor interventions stopping escalation before federal violations occur. Community liaison officers report increased trust, as residents understand their rights receive protection through proper procedures rather than hoping for individual advocacy. The bias training program expanded citywide after initial success in Patricia's precinct. Officers now recognize harassment patterns disguised as legitimate complaints, protecting both citizens and law enforcement from manipulation by individuals weaponizing police resources against law-abiding families. Body camera reviews identify problematic interactions before they escalate to civil rights violations. Detective Santos's conference presentation led to policy adoption in 14 Tennessee departments, creating regional standards for harassment prevention that extend protection beyond Memphis. Police academies across the Southeast now include Isaiah's case as required curriculum, teaching future officers to recognize and interrupt systematic bias campaigns. The HOA policy updates serve as a model for homeowner associations throughout the Memphis area. Cultural competency requirements for board members prevent individuals like Patricia from using organizational authority to target families based on race. Clear harassment reporting procedures protect residents while ensuring legitimate safety concerns receive appropriate attention. Patricia's real estate license suspension sends clear signals to industry professionals about consequences for fair housing violations. The state licensing board's investigation revealed additional complaints from minority home buyers who experienced discrimination during property searches, resulting in mandatory bias training for all agents in her previous firm. Isaiah's family has returned to Memphis twice since the initial incident, staying in the same rental property with complete community support. Maya and Zoe's basketball games now include neighborhood children whose parents encourage inclusive play rather than fearful avoidance. The transformation from harassment to hospitality demonstrates how accountability creates lasting change. The children processed their experience through creative expression that educates others. Maya's award-winning essay about civil rights enforcement has been shared in schools across Tennessee, teaching young people about systematic bias and the importance of documentation when facing injustice. Zoe's digital presentation about harassment recognition helps other families identify and respond to similar situations. Amelia's advocacy within the medical community raised awareness about how healthcare professionals can recognize and address systematic bias affecting their patients' families. Her presentation at the National Pediatric Conference led to the development of training materials, helping doctors identify signs of harassment-related trauma in children and families. The Memphis FBI field office uses Isaiah's documentation as training material for new agents, demonstrating how systematic patients can expose harassment patterns while protecting victims through proper evidence collection. His case represents successful civil rights enforcement that prioritized education and reform over individual punishment. Federal tracking systems record continued success in harassment prevention as communities implement policies learned from Patricia's consequences. The documented case serves as precedent for addressing systematic bias disguised as neighborhood concern, providing a legal framework for future interventions. Real estate professionals throughout Memphis reference the incident when discussing fair housing obligations, understanding that discrimination disguised as property value protection can result in federal consequences. Industry training programs include Patricia's case as a cautionary example of how bias can destroy professional careers. The neighborhood itself has become more diverse and welcoming as Patricia's removal eliminated the primary source of harassment targeting families of color. Property values remain stable while community inclusivity improves, disproving racist arguments about diversity affecting economic outcomes. The calm, data-grounded approach that characterized Isaiah's response throughout the harassment campaign reflects broader principles of civil rights enforcement. Systematic documentation, strategic patience, and focus on educational outcomes that prevent future violations rather than simply punishing individual perpetrators. Isaiah continues his federal civil rights work with renewed appreciation for how individual cases can create systematic change when handled with professional expertise and community support. His family's experience demonstrates that justice requires both personal resilience and institutional accountability to protect constitutional rights. The realistic hope emerging from their experience acknowledges ongoing challenges while celebrating meaningful progress. Systematic bias continues affecting communities nationwide, but proper procedures, adequate training, and community accountability can interrupt harassment campaigns before they escalate to violence or federal violations. Change requires individual courage from people like Tom Bradley and Margaret Phillips, who moved from silence to advocacy when confronted with clear evidence of systematic harassment. Their transformation represents hope that education can overcome comfortable indifference when communities choose accountability over conflict avoidance. Institutional reform through policy changes, training programs, and accountability mechanisms creates lasting protection for families who lack federal enforcement authority. Isaiah's strategic approach prioritized systematic change that benefits future harassment victims rather than personal vindication. Have you witnessed systematic bias that needed addressing but remained silent due to social pressure or fear of confrontation? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help others recognize harassment patterns before they escalate to dangerous levels. Like this video. If you believe accountability creates lasting change rather than temporary embarrassment for perpetrators of systematic bias. Subscribe to Black Voices Speak for more stories demonstrating how proper documentation, strategic patience, and community support can transform harassment campaigns into educational opportunities. Support civil rights organizations working to prevent harassment in your community. Remember that meaningful change requires both individual courage and systematic commitment to protecting everyone's constitutional rights, regardless of race, profession, or social status. The Washington family's experience proves that truth and proper procedures can prevail against systematic bias when communities choose justice over comfortable silence.